The champagne glasses clinked around me like wind chimes in a storm, each toast another reminder that 20 years of sleepless nights meant nothing to the people who mattered most. I stood in the corner of the grand ballroom at the Fairmont Hotel in Chicago, watching my life's work get credited to everyone except the person who actually built it. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The Tuesday morning partners meeting was supposed to be a celebration. The Meridian Tower project had just won the American Institute of Architects Gold Medal, the highest honor in our profession. 23 floors of revolutionary sustainable design, integrated living systems, and structural innovation that would change how cities thought about vertical communities. The project that had consumed my days and haunted my dreams for 3 years straight. I sat in the mahogany-lined conference room on the 42nd floor of Henderson & Associates, my portfolio spread across the glass table like evidence in a trial. Around me, 12 senior partners lounged in leather chairs that cost more than most people's cars. The morning light streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across faces I had trusted for 2 decades. Richard Henderson, the founding partner, stood at the head of the table in his signature navy suit, silver hair perfectly styled despite being 73 years old. His voice carried the same authoritative tone that had convinced mayors and billionaires to fund impossible dreams. "Gentlemen and lady," he nodded toward me with what I thought was respect. "We are here to discuss the unprecedented success of the Meridian Tower project. The AIA Gold Medal represents not just recognition, but validation of our firm's vision and leadership in sustainable architecture." I felt a flutter of anticipation. After 20 years of pouring everything into this firm, of missing family dinners and birthday parties, of learning every aspect of design and construction from foundation to rooftop, this moment felt like vindication. The younger partners smiled in my direction. James Crawford, who had joined the firm just 5 years ago, gave me a subtle thumbs up from across the table. "However," Henderson continued, and the word dropped like a stone into still water, "we must address something that has come to light regarding the project's development and Diane's role in it." The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. My hands, which had been resting confidently on my portfolio, suddenly felt cold against the leather binding. Henderson walked to the projection screen, clicking a remote that displayed a timeline I didn't recognize. After extensive review with our legal team and project stakeholders, we have discovered that Diane Peterson's contributions to the Meridian Tower, while enthusiastic, were largely supplemental to the core architectural vision developed by our senior design team. The words hit me like a physical blow. I opened my mouth to speak, but Henderson held up a hand. The innovative green wall systems, the revolutionary foundation design, the integrated wind capture technology. These elements were developed through collaborative efforts led by our senior partners. Diane's role, though valued, was primarily in implementation and documentation of ideas originated by others. I stared at the timeline on the screen. 3 years of my life reduced to bullet points that erased my existence. The late nights spent calculating load-bearing requirements for the wind capture system, the months of research into hydroponic integration, the countless meetings with engineers to solve problems no one had attempted before. All of it attributed to collaborative, senior leadership. Sarah Mitchell, the firm's newest partner, shifted uncomfortably in her chair. She had worked directly with me on the structural calculations, had seen me develop the breakthrough solutions that made the project possible. Our eyes met for a moment, and I saw something that looked like guilt flicker across her face. "Furthermore," Henderson continued, advancing to the next slide, "the success of this project cannot be attributed to any single individual's efforts. Architecture, as we all know, is a collaborative discipline. The recognition we have received is the result of 2 decades of firm excellence and leadership, not individual achievement." The slide showed a organizational chart with my name buried. In the middle tier, surrounded by arrows pointing to senior partners as project originators and design leaders. 20 years of climbing from junior draftsperson to senior architect, of learning every software program, of mastering structural engineering principles that most architects never bothered to understand, of developing relationships with contractors and city planners, all of it reduced to a middle management box on a corporate hierarchy. Thomas Bradley, a partner who had joined the firm 10 years after me, leaned forward with a patronizing smile. "Diane, we all appreciate your dedication and hard work, but let's be honest, you've been in the right place at the right time. The Meridian Tower's success is really about the firm's reputation and connections. The clients chose us because of our established track record, not because of any individual contributions." The room fell silent except for the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of Chicago traffic, 42 floors below. I felt every pair of eyes in the room watching me, waiting for my response. Some faces showed embarrassment, others showed calculated indifference, and a few showed what could only be described as satisfaction. I thought about the nights I had spent in this very conference room, surrounded by empty coffee cups and crumpled drafts, working through structural problems that kept me awake at 3 a.m. I thought about the phone calls with environmental engineers in Germany who had developed the green wall technology, the conversations conducted in broken English and sketched diagrams, because I was the only one at the firm who had bothered to learn about their innovations. I remembered the weekend I spent in Detroit, crawling through abandoned factory buildings with a structural engineer, studying how nature reclaimed industrial spaces so I could understand how to integrate living systems with steel and concrete. I remembered the contractor in Milwaukee, who taught me about wind dynamics in high-rise construction, knowledge that became crucial for the Meridian Tower's revolutionary wind capture system. I remembered my father, who had immigrated from Ireland, with nothing but a toolbox and a dream, working construction jobs during the day and studying architectural magazines at night. He had died when I was in college, never seeing me graduate, never knowing that his daughter would design buildings that touched the sky. But he had taught me that in America, hard work and knowledge would eventually be recognized, that merit would rise to the surface like cream. "The truth is," Henderson continued, his voice cutting through my memories like a blade, "Diane has been fortunate to be associated with such groundbreaking work. Sometimes being in the right place at the right time can look like exceptional talent, but we must be clear about where credit belongs." My throat felt tight, but I managed to keep my voice steady. "Richard, I have documentation of every design decision, every calculation, every innovation. My project files show the development process from initial concept through final implementation. The green wall integration was my research, my connections with European suppliers, my coordination with structural engineers to make it work." Henderson's expression didn't change. "Diane, I understand you feel invested in this project, but documentation doesn't equal origination. Following through on directives, no matter how thoroughly, doesn't constitute creative leadership." Bradley nodded in agreement. "The vision for sustainable high-rise design has been part of our firm's philosophy for years. You've been a good soldier in executing that vision, but let's not confuse execution with innovation." I looked around the room at faces I had worked alongside for decades. Margaret Reynolds, who I had mentored through her first major project 5 years ago, now avoided eye contact. David Chen, who had asked for my help on structural calculations dozens of times, studied his hands. Even Sarah Mitchell, who had directly benefited from my expertise, remained silent. The betrayal wasn't just professional. It was personal. These people had attended my housewarming party when I finally saved enough to buy a small condo in Lincoln Park. They had sent flowers when my mother was in the hospital. They had celebrated with me when I passed my structural engineering certification, making me one of the few architects in the city with dual credentials. "Moving forward," Henderson announced, returning to his position at the head of the table, The firm will be repositioning the Meridian Tower project in our marketing and awards submissions to properly reflect the collaborative nature of our work and the leadership structure that made it possible. He clicked to the next slide, which showed a proposed press release. My name appeared once, in the middle of a paragraph, listed among contributing team members. The headline read, Henderson and Associates' Visionary Leadership Brings Home AIA Gold Medal. Additionally, Henderson continued, we will be restructuring Diane's role to better align with her actual contributions to the firm. Effective immediately, she will transition from senior architect to project coordinator, focusing on documentation and implementation support for designs developed by our senior partners. The demotion hit like a punch to the stomach. 20 years of climbing the ladder, of proving myself in a field dominated by men who looked exactly like the ones sitting around this table, erased in a single sentence. Project coordinator was essentially an advanced secretary role, the kind of position I had held 15 years ago. The silence in the room was deafening. I could hear my own heartbeat, could feel the weight of every sacrifice I had made for this moment. The evenings spent studying when my college friends were out dating. The weekends spent visiting construction sites when my peers were relaxing, at home. The years of living in a studio apartment so I could save money for continuing education courses. I thought about the young women who had contacted me through LinkedIn, asking for advice about breaking into architecture, seeing me as proof that success was possible. I thought about the lecture I had given at Northwestern just 6 months ago, telling students that talent and hard work would always be recognized, that merit would overcome any obstacles. I see, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. Henderson's expression softened slightly as if he were delivering difficult news to a child. Diane, you should be proud of your contributions. Not everyone can claim to have been part of a gold medal project. That's something you can carry with you for the rest of your career. Carry with me. The phrase hung in the air like smoke, as if my career was ending, as if this moment was a conclusion rather than what I had thought would be a new beginning. Bradley leaned back in his chair with the satisfied expression of someone who had successfully defended his territory. The architecture world is small, Diane. Being associated with award-winning work, even in a support capacity, opens doors. You'll find opportunities. I stood up slowly, gathering my portfolio with hands that somehow remained steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. The leather portfolio had been a gift from my father's construction crew when I graduated from architecture school, inscribed with, "For Diane, build your dreams." The inscription had faded over the years, but I could still trace the letters with my finger. I'll need some time to process this, I said, proud that my voice didn't crack. Henderson nodded with what appeared to be genuine sympathy. Of course. Take the rest of the day. We'll discuss the transition details tomorrow. I walked toward the conference room door, my heels clicking against the marble floor with a rhythm that sounded like a countdown. Behind me, I could hear the rustle of papers being shuffled, the scrape of chairs being pushed back, the low murmur of voices already moving on to other business. As I reached for the door handle, I heard Bradley's voice, not quite low enough to be private. 20 years of good timing. Some people just get lucky. I paused with my hand on the door handle, my back to the room. 20 years of 16-hour days wasn't luck. Learning structural engineering principles that most architects never bothered with wasn't luck. Developing relationships with suppliers and contractors across 3 countries wasn't luck. Creating innovations that pushed the boundaries of what sustainable architecture could achieve wasn't luck. But I didn't turn around. I didn't defend myself. I didn't list my credentials or accomplishments or the countless nights I had given to this firm. Instead, I opened the door and walked out, carrying 20 years of dismissed expertise toward an uncertain future. The elevator ride down 42 floors felt like falling through space, each floor number lighting up and disappearing like years of my life being erased. When the doors opened in the lobby, I stepped out into a world that looked exactly the same, but felt completely different. Outside on Michigan Avenue, Chicago moved around me with its usual relentless energy. Buses rumbled past, pedestrians hurried along sidewalks, construction crews worked on building projects I had probably never heard of. The September air carried the scent of autumn and change. I stood on the sidewalk, looking up at the glass tower that had housed my dreams for 2 decades, and realized that everything I thought I knew about my life had just been rewritten by people who had never bothered to understand what I had actually built. But as I walked toward the parking garage, where my car waited, I felt something unexpected stirring beneath the devastation. It wasn't anger exactly, and it wasn't despair. It was something quieter but more dangerous. The recognition that I had been preparing for this moment without even knowing it. 20 years of work hadn't been luck, and 20 years of preparation was about to prove that beyond any doubt. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The email arrived at 6:47 a.m. the next morning, 3 sentences that deleted 2 decades of existence. Effective immediately, your access to firm systems has been suspended pending role transition. Please return all company property by end of business today. HR will contact you regarding your new position parameters. I stared at my laptop screen from my kitchen table, coffee growing cold beside a stack of trade magazines I had been reading since 4 a.m. The Henderson & Associates portal that had been my digital home for 20 years now showed a stark red error message. Access denied, contact system administrator. My company email bounced back with an automated response I had never seen before. This account has been deactivated. Please contact the main office for assistance. The systematic erasure began immediately. The firm's website, which I had checked obsessively throughout the night, no longer listed me in the senior architect section. My bio, which had detailed my dual credentials in architecture and structural engineering, my LEED certification, my published papers on sustainable design, all of it vanished as if it had never existed. The project gallery still showed the Meridian Tower, but my name had been scrubbed from the credits. Where project lead Diane Peterson, senior architect, had appeared just yesterday. Now it read, Design Team, Henderson & Associates Collaborative. Studio. I clicked through page after page, searching for any trace of myself. 20 years of project photos, award submissions, and client testimonials, all sanitized. The firm's LinkedIn page had been updated overnight. Posts from previous months that had featured my quotes about sustainable design now showed generic firm statements. The announcement about the AIA Gold Medal victory, which had originally included a photo of me presenting the project to the awards committee, now showed only the building itself with a caption about visionary firm leadership. My phone buzzed against the wooden table. A text from my assistant, Kelly Morrison, who had worked with me for 3 years. Diane, they told me not to forward any calls to you. I'm so confused. What's happening? Your office door is locked and they've already removed your nameplate. Walked to the window of my Lincoln Park condo, looking out at Lakeshore Drive where early morning traffic crawled toward downtown. The September sun cast long shadows across the lake, and I could see joggers following the lakefront path, their lives continuing in predictable patterns while mine had been upended overnight. Another message appeared on my phone, this one from Marcus Johnson, a civil engineer who had collaborated with me on 6 major projects over the past decade. Tried to call the office about the Kansas City specs. They said you're no longer handling the Morrison Building project. Nobody could explain why. Are you okay? The Morrison Building. I had spent 8 months developing the structural solutions. For that project, working through complex foundation issues that had stumped 3 other engineering firms. The building was scheduled to break ground in 2 weeks, and now they were acting as if I had never been involved. I opened my personal laptop and tried to access the project management software where I kept detailed records of all my work. My Login credentials no longer functioned. Years of documentation, progress reports, and technical specifications had been locked away from me. The architectural rendering software that I had used to develop 3D models for dozens of projects, access revoked. The structural analysis programs that required specialized certification to operate, account suspended. My phone rang. Catherine Walsh, the project manager from Sterling Construction, sounded frantic. Diane, I've been trying to reach you through the firm, but they keep transferring me to different people who say they don't know anything about our geothermal system integration. We have the city inspection scheduled for Monday, and you're the only one who understands the technical specifications. I closed my eyes, remembering the months I had spent researching geothermal technology for the Sterling project. I had traveled to Iceland at my own expense to study their geothermal building systems, had spent weeks learning from engineers who spoke minimal English, had developed a completely new approach to integrating geothermal energy with high-rise construction. Now they were pretending none of that expertise existed. Catherine, I'm no longer with Henderson and Associates, I said, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. What? Since when? You were the lead on this project. You developed the entire system design. We specifically chose Henderson because of your geothermal expertise. The silence stretched between us. I could hear construction noise in the background of her call, the sound of work continuing despite the chaos that had been unleashed by my absence. I don't understand, Catherine continued. The city inspector specifically requested that you be present for the technical review. You're the only architect in Chicago who's certified for this type of geothermal integration. What are we supposed to do? I walked to my home office, a spare bedroom I had converted into a workspace years ago. The walls were covered with framed certificates, my architecture license, my structural engineering certification, my LEED accreditation, my green building specialist credentials. Each one represented months or years of additional study, examinations passed while working full-time, knowledge acquired through determination and countless sacrifice. My mother had helped me hang these certificates when I first bought the condo. She had stood back, hands on her hips, and said with the Irish accent she had never quite lost, "Your father would be so proud, Diane. Look at all you've accomplished." She had touched each frame gently, reading the names of institutions and organizations that meant nothing to her, but represented everything to me. My mother was gone now, 3 years from pancreatic cancer that took her faster than any of us had expected. But I remembered her words during those final weeks in the hospital. You've built something that can't be taken away from you, love. Your knowledge, your skills, they belong to you, not to any company. The landline rang, an unusual sound in an age of cell phones. I had kept the old phone because some international suppliers and contractors still preferred traditional communication methods. The caller ID showed a number I recognized immediately. Bjorn Eriksson, the Norwegian engineer who had consulted on the Meridian Tower's wind capture system. Diane, I have been trying to reach you through your office, but they tell me you are no longer available for consultation. This is most concerning. The wind tunnel data for the Seattle project. You are the only one who understands our calculation methods. Bjorn's English was heavily accented but precise. We had developed a working relationship over 2 years, exchanging technical documents and refining wind dynamics calculations that pushed the boundaries of sustainable high-rise design. His company had specifically requested me for the Seattle consultation because of my unique understanding of their proprietary technology. The Henderson firm, they say they have other experts who can review our specifications, but this is not possible. The integration requires someone who has studied our methods extensively. You are the only American architect who has this knowledge. I sat down at my desk, surrounded by technical manuals I had collected from around the world. Texts in German about green building technology, Japanese research papers on earthquake-resistant sustainable design, Norwegian studies on wind dynamics in urban environments. I had taught myself enough of each language to understand the technical concepts, filling gaps in knowledge that no American university had been able to provide. The inbox on my personal email was filling with increasingly desperate messages. Contractors who had relied on my expertise for years, confused about why they couldn't reach me through normal channels. Suppliers from Germany and Denmark who had received abrupt notifications that their consulting contracts with Henderson and Associates had been restructured. City planning officials who had specific questions about projects I had shepherded through complex approval processes. Elena Rodriguez from the Chicago Department of Buildings had left 3 voicemails. Diane, we need to discuss the Lincoln Avenue project specifications. The revised drawings don't match the structural calculations you submitted last month, and we have concerns about load-bearing capacity. Please call me back as soon as possible. I had spent 2 months working with Elena to navigate the city's evolving green building requirements for the Lincoln Avenue project. We had developed innovative solutions that satisfied both environmental standards and structural safety requirements. Now they were trying to proceed without the architect who had created those solutions. My cell phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer Park, a young architect who had graduated from University of Illinois the previous year. I had mentored her through her internship, helped her prepare for her licensing exam, and guided her through her first major project assignment. Diane, I heard something happened at Henderson. Everyone is being really weird about it. Bradley told me to stop asking questions about the Meridian Tower details. This doesn't make sense. Are you available to talk? Jennifer represented something precious to me, the next generation of women in architecture, the ones who would face the same challenges I had encountered but hopefully with more support. I had seen myself in her determination, her willingness to work longer hours than her male colleagues to prove her competence, her hunger for knowledge that extended beyond the basic requirements. Over the past year, I had introduced Jennifer to my network of international contacts, helped her understand the complexities of sustainable design, and showed her how to navigate the political dynamics of large firms. She had called me her architectural guardian angel in a thank you note after successfully completing her first solo project. I poured fresh coffee and sat back down at my kitchen table, looking out at the lake where morning joggers had been, replaced by afternoon walkers. The day was passing in a blur of severed connections and confused contacts. Each phone call and message reinforced how completely I had been erased from the professional ecosystem I had spent 20 years building. My personal phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed unknown number, but I recognized the voice. Immediately, Dr. Patricia Fleming from Northwestern University's School of Architecture. I had guest lectured in her sustainable design courses for 5 years. Diane, I hope you don't mind me calling your personal number. I got it from the alumni directory. I'm calling about next month's symposium on green building innovation. You're scheduled to keynote the session on integrated renewable systems, but I received a call from Henderson and Associates saying you're no longer available to speak on behalf of the firm. My throat tightened. The Northwestern Symposium had been something I had looked forward to for months. It was an opportunity to share the innovations I had developed, to inspire the next generation of architects to push beyond conventional design. Limitations. The presentation I had prepared showcased 5 years of research and practical application, with case studies from projects that had transformed how sustainable design was implemented in urban environments. They suggested that Thomas Bradley could speak instead, discussing the firm's general approach to sustainability. But Patricia, frankly, that's not what we need. Our students need to hear from someone who has actually solved these technical challenges, not from someone who can speak in generalities about firm philosophy. I walked to my home office and opened the filing cabinet where I kept physical copies of everything, a habit developed from years of dealing with digital systems that could fail or be manipulated. Inside were folders containing documentation. That told a different story than the one Henderson and Associates was now promoting. The Meridian Tower folder contained original sketches in my handwriting, calculation sheets showing my structural analysis, correspondence with European suppliers that I had initiated and managed, and technical specifications that bore my digital signature. The Sterling Construction folder held similar documentation for the geothermal integration project. The Morrison Building folder contained 8 months of problem-solving that had transformed an impossible foundation challenge into an innovative solution. Each folder represented not just a project, but a piece of knowledge I had acquired, a relationship I had built, a problem I had solved through determination and expertise. The accumulation of 20 years of learning, growing, and innovating. All of it dismissed as lucky timing by people who had never bothered to understand what I had actually accomplished. My laptop chimed with an email from someone I hadn't expected to hear from. Michael Chen, a structural engineer from San Francisco who had collaborated with me on earthquake-resistant sustainable design. We had worked together on a project in Oakland 2 years ago, developing new approaches to seismic safety in green buildings. Diane, I heard through the professional network that you've left Henderson. I don't know the details, but I wanted you to know that the work we did together in Oakland has been recognized by the California Seismic Safety Commission. They're inviting us to present our innovations at their annual conference. The invitation specifically mentions your contributions to integrated seismic and environmental design. I hope you'll still be interested in participating. For the first time since the meeting yesterday, I felt something other than devastation. Michael's email was a reminder that my expertise existed beyond the walls of Henderson and Associates, that the knowledge I had developed and the relationships I had built belonged to me, not to the firm that was trying to erase my contributions. Opened a new document on my laptop and began typing a response to Michael, but stopped after the first sentence. Something held me back. Not uncertainty about my abilities, but a growing awareness that I needed to be strategic about my next moves. The late afternoon sun streamed through my office windows, casting shadows across the certificates on my walls. 20 years of education, certification, and expertise couldn't be deleted by corporate politics. The relationships I had built with engineers, suppliers, and contractors around the world existed independently of any firm's employment structure. My phone showed 17 missed calls, 43 unread text messages, and 62 emails in my personal inbox. Each one represented someone who had valued my expertise, who had relied on my knowledge, who understood that what I brought to projects couldn't be easily replaced. But instead of responding to any of them, I closed my laptop, turned off my phone, and sat in the growing silence of my condo. The lake outside my window reflected the afternoon light like a mirror, and I realized that for the first time in 20 years, I had complete control over what came next. They had tried to erase me from their version of history, but they had also freed me from any obligation to continue building their legacy. Tomorrow, I would begin building my own. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of possibility. 3 days after my erasure from Henderson and Associates, I walked to the back of my bedroom closet and moved aside winter coats I hadn't touched since March. Behind them, a small fireproof safe sat on the floor, its digital lock unchanged for 7 years. I entered the 6-digit code, my father's birthday, and heard the familiar click of tumblers releasing. Inside lay the foundation of a parallel career I had been building in shadows for nearly a decade. First item I removed was a leather portfolio, different from the one I had carried at Henderson. This one contained patents, 12 of them, filed under my name alone between 2018 and 2023. Each patent protected innovations I had developed during evenings and weekends, using my own resources, careful never to overlap with any project I was assigned at the firm. Patent 847-329, Integrated Photovoltaic Thermal Building Skin System. I had conceived this technology during a sleepless night in 2019, frustrated by the limitations of conventional solar panel installations. The system integrated solar collection with thermal regulation, creating building facades that generated electricity while maintaining optimal interior temperatures. I had spent 18 months and $12,000 of my own money developing prototypes, testing materials, and filing the complete patent application. Patent number 11-203-467. Modular green infrastructure for urban high-rise construction. This innovation had emerged from my research trips to Singapore and Amsterdam, studying how vertical gardens could be engineered for structural integration rather than cosmetic application. The modular system allowed for scalable integration of living walls that contributed to building stability rather than compromising it. Patent Chart 11-556-892. Adaptive wind capture system for variable urban conditions. Unlike the Norwegian technology I had helped implement at the Meridian Tower, this system was entirely my own creation. It used responsive blade positioning and microturbine arrays that could adjust to changing wind patterns throughout the day, maximizing energy capture in the unpredictable air currents of city environments. Each patent represented hundreds of hours of research, design, and testing that I had conducted independently. While Henderson and Associates owned the rights to anything I created during work hours or using company resources, these innovations belonged entirely to me. I had been scrupulously careful to develop them using my personal time, my own materials, and my independent research. The second item in the safe was a flash drive containing 5 years of digital records, not stolen files from Henderson. I would never compromise professional ethics that way, but documentation of my independent activities. Screenshots of international conferences where I had presented my research under my own name, not as a representative of any firm. Correspondence with universities in Denmark, Germany, and Japan, where I had been invited to collaborate on research projects. Contracts for consulting work I had performed independently, always during vacation time or weekends, always with clients who had no connection to Henderson projects. The University of Copenhagen had paid me $8,000 to consult on their new sustainable architecture curriculum in 2021, the technical. University of Berlin had invited me to co-author a research paper on integrated renewable systems in 2022. The Japan Institute of Architects had featured my modular green infrastructure system in their quarterly journal in 2023, with my name prominently displayed as the sole inventor. All of this had happened parallel to my work at Henderson, invisible to my colleagues who assumed my entire professional identity revolved around the firm. While they socialized at company happy hours, I was Skyping with researchers in other time zones. While they attended weekend team-building events, I was in laboratories testing prototype materials. While they discussed firm politics over lunch, I was developing expertise that no one at Henderson even knew existed. The third item was a business license for Peterson Sustainable Design Solutions, LLC, filed with the state of Illinois in January 2020. I had established the business during the early months of the pandemic, when uncertainty about employment everywhere made backup plans seem prudent. The company existed as a shell, never actively promoted, never used for major projects, but legally positioned to begin operations at any moment. I had maintained the business license meticulously, filing annual reports, keeping the registration current, even establishing a separate business bank account that had remained largely dormant. The company had its own tax identification number, its own professional insurance policy, its own certified mailing address. On paper, I had been running a legitimate architectural consulting business for over 3 years. The safe contained one more crucial element, a client list I had been cultivating for years. Not Henderson clients. That would have been unethical and potentially illegal. These were connections I had made through my independent research and patent work, relationships that existed entirely outside the traditional architectural firm structure. Dr. Klaus Weber from the Munich Institute of Technology had been following my renewable integration research since 2019. His emails, printed and filed chronologically, showed a progression from academic interest to serious collaboration discussions. By 2022, he was suggesting joint ventures for European projects that could benefit from my patented technologies. Yuki Tanaka from the Osaka Urban Planning Commission had reached out after seeing my presentation at the International Green Building Conference in 2021. Her organization was specifically interested in modular systems that could be adapted to Japan's seismic requirements while maintaining environmental efficiency. We had been exchanging technical specifications for over 2 years. Sarah Aboriginal from the Australian Department of Sustainable Infrastructure had contacted me directly after reading my research paper on adaptive wind systems. Australia's unique climate conditions and energy challenges made them particularly interested in technologies that could function effectively in extreme weather variations. Each of these relationships had developed organically, based on recognition of my expertise, rather than my employment at any particular firm. They knew me as Diane Peterson, innovator and researcher, not as an employee of Henderson and Associates. My reputation in these circles was built on my patents, my published research, and my demonstrated knowledge, not on any corporate affiliation. Spread the contents of the safe across my dining room table, creating a landscape of evidence that told a completely different story than the one Henderson was trying to construct. While they portrayed me as a fortunate implementer of other people's ideas, the documentation showed 7 years of independent innovation, international recognition, and systematic preparation for professional independence. My laptop contained additional evidence that Henderson had never suspected. Since 2018, I had been invited to speak at 17 international conferences, always presenting my own research rather than company projects. The speaking fees from these events had been deposited into my business account, creating a small but growing revenue stream that proved market demand for my expertise. The International Conference on Sustainable Urban Design had paid me $4,000 to keynote their 2022 event in Amsterdam. The Dubai Future Architecture Summit had covered my travel expenses plus a $3,000 speaking fee for my presentation on adaptive building systems. The Toronto Green Building Expo had invited me back 3 consecutive years, each time increasing their compensation for my participation. These speaking engagements had served multiple purposes beyond generating income. They had established my reputation as an independent expert, created opportunities to network with potential clients and collaborators, and provided platforms to present my innovations to global audiences. Most importantly, they had demonstrated that my expertise was valued far beyond the confines of any single employment situation. My phone records showed international calls I had been making for years, conversations with researchers, suppliers, and potential partners that Henderson had never known about. I had been building bridges to opportunities that existed entirely outside their sphere of influence. The file labeled Correspondence contained printouts of emails that revealed the true scope of my independent activities. Invitations to serve on editorial boards for technical journals, requests to peer review research papers for universities around the world, inquiries about licensing my patented technologies from manufacturers in 6 different countries. One email thread particularly captured the irony of my situation. In March 2023, just months before my dismissal from Henderson, a manufacturing consortium in Sweden had offered to purchase exclusive European licensing rights to my adaptive wind capture technology for $250,000. I had politely declined, explaining that I was committed to my current employment and not ready to pursue independent commercialization of my innovations. How different that decision looked now. While Henderson and Associates was trying to erase my contributions and questioning my competence, Swedish engineers were willing to pay $250,000 for access to my innovations. The documentation also revealed something else I had been preparing without fully acknowledging it to myself: a comprehensive business plan for Peterson's Sustainable Design Solutions. During quiet evenings over the past 2 years, I had been sketching out operational strategies, identifying target markets, and developing service offerings that would differentiate my independent practice from traditional architectural firms. Rather than competing directly with established firms for conventional projects. My business plan focused on specialized consulting for emerging technologies and sustainable innovations. I would offer patent licensing, technical consultation for renewable integration, and expertise in regulatory navigation for green building certifications. These services required the kind of deep technical knowledge that most architectural firms didn't possess, creating a market niche that was both profitable and difficult for competitors to replicate. The plan included financial projections based on my existing patents, speaking fees, and consulting inquiries I had already received. Conservative estimates suggested I could generate more income in my first year of independence than I had earned as a senior architect at Henderson, with the potential for exponential growth as my patent portfolio matured and licensing opportunities expanded. I had even identified specific startup costs and operational requirements. My home office could serve as initial headquarters, eliminating expensive commercial lease obligations. My existing professional insurance could be expanded to cover independent consulting. My network of international contacts provided immediate access to projects and collaborations that would take most new firms years to develop. Looking at the evidence spread across my dining room table, I realized that my apparent catastrophe at Henderson might actually be the catalyst I had been unconsciously preparing for. Every patent filed, every international relationship cultivated, every speaking engagement accepted had been building toward this moment of independence. The final element in my safe was perhaps the most important, a detailed analysis of Henderson and Associates' structural vulnerabilities that I had observed over 20 years but never documented until recently. Not proprietary information or confidential client data, but patterns of dependency and knowledge gaps that had become apparent through my daily interactions with colleagues. The firm's reputation was built on sustainable design expertise, but that expertise was concentrated in very few people, primarily me and two other senior architects who were both approaching retirement. The institutional knowledge required to navigate complex environmental regulations, coordinate with specialized international suppliers, and integrate emerging technologies existed mainly in the minds of individuals rather than in systematized company procedures. More significantly, many of Henderson's most prestigious clients had specifically requested my involvement in their projects. The Sterling construction relationship existed because of my geothermal expertise. The Morrison Building project had been awarded to Henderson based on my structural innovation capabilities. The upcoming Kansas City development had chosen the firm specifically because of my sustainable design leadership. These relationships were more personal than institutional. Clients trusted Diane Peterson, who happened to work at Henderson and Associates, not Henderson and Associates as an abstract corporate entity. My departure would force them to confront the difference between my individual expertise and the firm's general capabilities. As afternoon shadows lengthened across my dining room table, I realized that 20 years of apparent loyalty to Henderson had actually been 20 years of preparation for independence. Every skill developed, every relationship built, every innovation created had been accumulating toward this moment when I would need to rely entirely on my own capabilities. The evidence was overwhelming. I hadn't been lucky at Henderson and Associates. Henderson and Associates had been lucky to have me, and now their luck had run out. The first crack appeared 11 days after my dismissal, at 2:43 a.m. on a Thursday morning. My phone buzzed with a call from Alejandro Santos, the night shift supervisor at Sterling Construction. His voice carried the kind of panic that comes from watching expensive mistakes unfold in real time. "Diane, I know you're not with Henderson anymore, but we have a major problem. The geothermal pump system just failed catastrophically. There's flooding in the basement level, and the backup systems aren't responding. We need someone who understands your integration design immediately." I sat up in bed, instantly alert. The Sterling project's geothermal system was completely custom, based on specifications I had developed after months of research and coordination with Icelandic engineers. No one else at Henderson had been involved in the technical details because No one else had possessed the specialized knowledge required. What exactly happened? I asked, already knowing that whatever had gone wrong was probably related to a maintenance protocol that existed only in documentation they no longer had access to. The primary circulation pumps started cycling erratically around midnight. We followed the standard shutdown procedures, but instead of stabilizing, the whole system went into some kind of feedback loop. Now we have 2 inches of heated water, covering 4,000 square feet of basement space, and the environmental controls are completely offline. I walked to my home office where I kept personal copies of my research notes. The Stirling geothermal system operated differently from conventional installations because I had adapted Icelandic deep earth extraction methods for Chicago's geological conditions. The integration required specific pump sequencing and pressure management that deviated from standard American practices. Alejandro, you need to manually override the secondary pressure valves before the backup pumps engage. There's a specific sequence. We tried calling Henderson, he interrupted. They said Thomas Bradley would handle it, but he's been here for 3 hours and can't locate the override controls. He keeps looking at standard geothermal schematics that don't match your installation. Of course, Bradley couldn't solve it. He had never studied European geothermal technology, had never traveled to Iceland to understand deep earth systems, had never spent months learning the specialized engineering required to adapt those methods for American construction. He was trying to fix a Ferrari engine with knowledge about lawnmowers. The override panel is behind the main distribution manifold, but it's labeled in Icelandic because that's how the original equipment arrived. The controls are marked with symbols, not English text. Can you walk us through it over the phone? I paused, looking out my bedroom window at the pre-dawn darkness of Lincoln Park. I could solve their crisis in 20 minutes, but doing so would essentially provide free consulting to the firm that had just destroyed my career and reputation. Alejandro, I'm no longer employed by Henderson and Associates. I can't provide technical support for their projects. The silence on his end stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Then he spoke, his voice heavy with frustration and exhaustion. Diane, this isn't about Henderson. This is about 47 families who are supposed to move into their new homes next month. The heating system for the entire building is connected to this geothermal array. If we can't fix this, the whole project gets delayed indefinitely. After I hung up, sleep was impossible. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table, watching the sun rise over Lake Michigan, while wondering how many other Stirling construction employees were dealing with flooding basements and broken promises of cutting-edge sustainable technology. My phone rang again at 7:15 a.m. This time, it was Janet Morrison, the project developer for the Morrison Building in downtown Kansas City. Her voice was tight with barely controlled fury. Diane, I've been trying to reach someone at Henderson who can explain why our foundation specifications don't work. We broke ground yesterday, and the soil conditions are completely different from what your structural analysis predicted. The engineering team is saying the foundation design won't support the planned building height. The Morrison Building project had consumed 8 months of my life, working through foundation challenges that had defeated 3 previous architectural firms. The site sat on a complex geological formation that required innovative deep foundation, solutions combined with soil stabilization techniques I had researched through contacts at the Colorado School of Mines. Janet, Henderson should have all the geological surveys and alternative foundation specifications in the project files. That's what I thought too. But Bradley says the files only contain basic soil reports. He's telling me that you must have been working from incomplete data, that no one at Henderson understands how you arrived at your structural calculations. I set down my coffee cup, feeling anger rise in my throat. Janet, I spent 2 months coordinating with geotechnical engineers in 3 states to solve that site's foundation problems. I have correspondence with Colorado mining engineers about underground limestone formations. I have stress analysis calculations that required specialized software most architects don't even know exists. Then why can't Bradley access any of that information? The answer was simple. Because I had done most of that specialized research using my personal resources and contacts, documentation that existed in my home office rather than in Henderson's corporate files. The firm owned the final project deliverables, but they didn't own the underlying expertise that had made those deliverables possible. Bradley is telling our investors that the foundation problems are due to budget constraints, that proper geological analysis would have required additional fees that we didn't approve. But Diane, that's not what happened. You told us the site was challenging but feasible. You never mentioned budget limitations. 2 hours later, my phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Klaus Weber at the Munich Institute of Technology. The timestamp showed 3:47 p.m. Munich time, making it early morning in Chicago. Diane, we have received concerning communication from Henderson and Associates. They are claiming ownership of the photovoltaic integration technology we have been discussing for the Frankfurt project. However, our research indicates this technology is protected by patents filed under your individual name. We are confused about the legal status of our planned collaboration. I forwarded Klaus the documentation from my safe patent filings that clearly established my ownership of the photovoltaic thermal building skin system. Within hours, his response arrived with copies of emails he had received from Henderson's legal department. The firm was attempting to claim rights to technologies I had developed independently, patents I had filed using my own resources, innovations that had no connection to any Henderson project. They were trying to monetize my intellectual property while simultaneously claiming I had never contributed anything significant to their work. By noon, the crisis was accelerating. Elena Rodriguez from the Chicago Department of Buildings called, with an edge of desperation in her voice. Diane, I have the Lincoln Avenue project inspection scheduled for tomorrow, but the revised structural drawings Henderson submitted don't match the specifications you filed with us last month. There are load-bearing calculations that don't make sense, and safety margins that appear insufficient for the planned green roof installation. I had spent 2 months working with Elena to navigate Chicago's evolving environmental regulations for the Lincoln Avenue project. The green roof system required specialized structural support that I had designed using knowledge from German engineers who pioneered heavy vegetation installations on urban buildings. The city inspector is threatening to shut down the project unless someone can explain how these new calculations justify the planned green infrastructure load. Bradley told me that you had been working with incomplete information, that your original specifications were overly conservative. Overly conservative. The phrase would have been laughable if it weren't so dangerous. My structural calculations had included safety factors that accounted for soil saturation during heavy rainfall, wind load variations throughout the seasons, and the settling effects of mature vegetation over time. These weren't conservative estimates. They were comprehensive engineering solutions that prevented catastrophic failures. Elena, the original specifications I filed are accurate. Any revisions that don't account for saturated soil loads and seasonal vegetation changes are potentially unsafe. That's what I was afraid you'd say. The afternoon brought a cascade of similar calls. The Seattle wind capture project was stalled because Bjorn Eriksson's Norwegian engineering firm had refused to work with anyone other than me. The Oakland seismic-resistant design was under review by California regulators who had specific questions about integration methods that only I understood. The Amsterdam Sustainable Housing collaboration was on hold pending clarification about which Henderson employee actually possessed the required technical expertise. Each crisis reinforced the same pattern. Henderson and Associates had built their reputation on my specialized knowledge, but they had never bothered to understand or document the expertise that made their success possible. They had treated me as a replaceable employee while relying on irreplaceable capabilities that existed nowhere else in the firm. At 4:30 p.m., my phone rang with a number I hadn't expected to see, the main line for Henderson and Associates. The voice belonged to Margaret Reynolds, the partner who had avoided eye contact during my humiliation. Diane, we need to discuss the Sterling situation. Can you come in tomorrow morning? I'm no longer employed by Henderson and Associates, Margaret. I don't have any obligation to discuss anything with you. Please. The Sterling project is facing significant delays, and we're getting pressure from multiple clients about other projects. We just need some technical guidance to stabilize these situations. I walked to my window, looking across Lincoln Park toward the downtown skyline where Henderson's offices occupied 4 floors of a premium tower. Somewhere in those offices, 12 senior partners who had dismissed my contributions as lucky timing were now discovering exactly how unlucky they were without me. Margaret, 3 weeks ago your firm publicly stated that my contributions were supplemental, that my role was primarily documentation and implementation. If that was true, then anyone at Henderson should be able to handle these technical issues. The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if she was consulting with someone else in the room. Diane, perhaps there was some miscommunication about your role in these projects. We're prepared to discuss a consulting arrangement that would fairly compensate you for your expertise. Consulting arrangement. 20 years of full-time dedication reduced to hourly consulting when they finally needed the expertise they had claimed didn't exist. What kind of consulting arrangement? We could offer you $200 per hour for technical consultation on existing projects. I almost laughed. $200 per hour was less than I charged for speaking engagements at international conferences. It was a fraction of what European firms paid me for patent licensing consultations. It represented their complete misunderstanding of the market value of truly specialized knowledge. Margaret, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not interested in consulting for Henderson and Associates. Diane, be reasonable. These projects represent millions of dollars in committed contracts. There are jobs at stake, client relationships that took years to build. Then perhaps you should have considered that before publicly questioning my competence and demoting me to project coordinator. That evening, I received an email that crystallized everything Henderson had lost by discarding me. Dr. Patricia Fleming from Northwestern University forwarded me a message she had received from the AIA Gold Medal Selection Committee. Patricia, we are reaching out because we understand that Diane Peterson was the primary architect responsible for the sustainable innovations in the Meridian Tower project that received this year's gold medal. We would like to invite her to present the technical details of her work at our annual Innovation Symposium in December. However, we have been unable to reach her through Henderson and Associates, and the firm seems uncertain about her availability. The irony was perfect. The same industry organization that had awarded Henderson and Associates their highest honor was now seeking me directly, recognizing that the innovations they wanted to showcase belonged to an individual architect, not to the firm that employed her. I forwarded the email to Margaret Reynolds without comment. By the end of the week, the pattern was undeniable. Every specialized project I had led was experiencing problems that no one else at Henderson could solve. Every international relationship I had cultivated was demanding to work with me specifically. Every technical innovation that had built the firm's reputation was revealed to be dependent on knowledge that walked out the door when I left. The Morrison building was shut down pending foundation redesign. The Sterling construction project was hemorrhaging money while contractors waited for someone who understood geothermal integration. The Lincoln Avenue development was stalled by city inspectors who refused to approve structural calculations that didn't account for green roof loads. Seattle, Amsterdam, Frankfurt, Oakland. Every city where Henderson had secured prestigious, sustainable design contracts was now questioning whether the firm actually possessed the expertise they had advertised. I spent Saturday morning reading industry publications that were beginning to notice Henderson's struggles. Architectural Record ran a brief article about project delays affecting multiple Henderson developments, questioning whether the firm had overextended itself in promising cutting-edge sustainable technology without adequate technical resources. The article quoted an unnamed source. Henderson built their reputation on innovations they didn't fully understand. Now they're discovering that expertise can't be easily replaced when key personnel leave. Sunday evening brought the call I had been expecting for days. Richard Henderson himself, the 73-year-old founding partner who had dismissed my contributions as supplemental documentation. His voice carried none of the authoritative confidence I remembered from the partners' meeting. Instead, he sounded like what he had become: an old man watching his legacy crumble in real time. "Diane, we need to talk." "Do we, Richard?" "The Sterling situation has escalated beyond what we anticipated. We're facing potential legal action from multiple contractors, and our insurance company is asking questions about our technical competence in geothermal systems." I sat in my home office, surrounded by patents, international correspondence, and documentation that proved 20 years of expertise they had never bothered to understand or value. "Perhaps you should have thought about that before accusing me of sabotage in front of 1,000 people." The desperation in his voice was unmistakable. "What would it take to bring you back? We're prepared to reinstate your senior architect position, restore your project leadership responsibilities, provide a significant salary increase." For the first time since my dismissal, I smiled. "Richard, I'm not interested in returning to Henderson and Associates, but I am interested in discussing licensing agreements for the patents you've been trying to use without authorization." The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know about how completely the tables had turned. The co-working space in River North wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. 2,400 square feet of open workspace with concrete floors, exposed, brick walls and windows that faced west toward the Loop skyline. I had signed the lease 3 weeks after Henderson's collapse began accelerating, using funds from my business account that had been dormant for years. The space came furnished with modular desks, rolling whiteboards, and a kitchen area that smelled perpetually of the coffee shop on the ground floor. More importantly, it came with complete independence from any corporate structure that could erase my contributions or rewrite my history. I spent the first morning arranging my workstation near the largest window, spreading out the contents of my safe across 2 adjoining desks. Patents, international correspondence, technical manuals, and research documentation created a landscape of possibilities that no one could take away from me. My first call was to Dr. Klaus Weber in Munich. The time difference meant reaching him at 4 p.m. Central European Time, just as his workday was winding down. "Diane, I am relieved to hear from you directly. The situation with Henderson and Associates has become quite problematic. They continue to claim rights to your photovoltaic integration technology, but our legal team has confirmed that your patents are individually held and completely valid in European markets." Klaus had been waiting 3 years for the right opportunity to commercialize the building-integrated photovoltaic system I had developed. The technology promised to revolutionize how European cities approached renewable energy in urban environments, but it required an architect who understood both the technical specifications and the regulatory landscape. "Klaus, I'm prepared to move forward with our collaboration, but not through Henderson. I've established Peterson Sustainable Design Solutions as an independent consulting firm. We can structure this as a direct licensing partnership." "Excellent. Our Frankfurt project has been delayed specifically because we need someone who can navigate both American innovation standards and German regulatory requirements. You are the only architect we know who possesses both capabilities." Within 2 hours, Klaus had emailed a preliminary partnership agreement worth $87,000 for the first phase of consultation, with licensing royalties that could extend into 7 figures if the Frankfurt installation succeeded as expected. The second call was to Yuki Tanaka in Osaka. Her enthusiasm was immediately apparent, despite the language barriers that occasionally complicated our technical discussions. "Peterson-san, we have been hoping you would become available for independent collaboration. The Ministry of Construction has approved funding for modular green infrastructure pilot program, but only if we can identify architect with proven innovation in seismic-compatible living building systems." Yuki's project represented something unprecedented in sustainable architecture, integrating extensive green infrastructure with Japan's rigorous earthquake resistance requirements. The combination required expertise that existed nowhere else in the world, knowledge I had developed through years of studying both European environmental technology and Pacific Rim seismic engineering. The initial consulting contract would be worth $42,000 for system design and regulatory guidance. However, if the pilot program succeeds, the ministry is prepared to fund full-scale implementation across 6 major cities. I asked for the contract details in writing, knowing that this single project could establish Peterson Sustainable Design Solutions as the premier international consultant for earthquake-resistant green building technology. The third call was to Sarah Aboriginal in Melbourne. Her Australian accent carried excitement that transcended the digital connection between Chicago and the Southern Hemisphere. Diane, perfect timing. We've just received approval for the Sydney Harbour Sustainable Tower project, but we need someone who can adapt wind capture technology to Southern Hemisphere climate patterns. Your adaptive wind system patents are exactly what we've been searching for. Australia's unique environmental conditions, extreme heat, variable winds, and strict energy efficiency requirements created challenges that standard American or European green building technology couldn't address. My adaptive wind capture system, developed through years of studying weather patterns from multiple continents, offered solutions that no other architect could provide. The project timeline is aggressive, but the compensation reflects that urgency. $65,000 for initial system design and installation oversight, with additional licensing fees based on energy generation performance. By the end of my first week in the River North space, I had secured contracts worth over $200,000, more than I had earned in my final year at Henderson & Associates. More importantly, every contract recognized my individual expertise and credited me as the primary innovator, the exact opposite of the erasure I had experienced at the firm. The workspace began attracting attention from unexpected sources. Jennifer Park, the young architect I had mentored at Henderson, appeared at my door on a Friday afternoon, looking around the open space with curiosity and something approaching awe. Diane, I heard through the professional network that you were starting something independent. I wanted to see if you might need assistance with any of your projects. Jennifer had been one of the few people at Henderson who understood the technical complexity of my work, having collaborated with me on several sustainable design challenges that required advanced engineering knowledge. More importantly, she possessed something rare in the industry: genuine intellectual curiosity about emerging technologies, rather than just career advancement. Jennifer, I'm working on projects that require expertise in seismic engineering, European environmental regulations, and renewable energy integration. The learning curve would be steep, and I can't offer the salary security of a large firm. Her response was immediate. I'd rather learn cutting-edge technology working for someone I respect than spend another year implementing other people's ideas at Henderson. 2 weeks later, Jennifer was occupying the desk next to mine, diving into technical manuals about Japanese earthquake resistance standards, while simultaneously corresponding with engineers in Munich about photovoltaic integration requirements. Her enthusiasm for learning complex material reminded me of my own hunger for knowledge 20 years earlier. The second addition to my team came from an unexpected source. Marcus Johnson, the civil engineer who had collaborated with me on 6 major projects over the past decade, called on a Tuesday morning with frustration evident in his voice. Diane, I've been trying to work with Henderson on the Morrison building redesign, but it's become impossible. Bradley keeps asking me to simplify my structural analysis to match their basic capabilities, which means eliminating the innovative foundation solutions that made the project feasible in the first place. Marcus possessed expertise in geological engineering that most architectural firms never accessed directly. He had worked for large engineering consultancies for 15 years before establishing his own practice, specializing in complex foundation solutions for challenging building sites. I'm tired of dumbing down sophisticated engineering to accommodate architects who don't want to understand technical details. Would you be interested in forming a strategic partnership? My geological analysis expertise combined with your sustainable innovation capabilities could tackle projects that no traditional firm could handle. The partnership made immediate sense. Marcus brought credibility with city planning departments, relationships with specialized contractors, and engineering expertise that complemented my architectural and renewable energy knowledge. Together, we could offer comprehensive solutions that integrated structural innovation with environmental technology. Our first joint project emerged from the chaos Henderson had created. The Morrison Building developers, frustrated by months of delays and inadequate solutions, approached us, directly through intermediaries who had worked on previous Kansas City developments. We need architects and engineers who can solve complex problems rather than making excuses about why things can't be done, Janet Morrison explained during a video conference from her Kansas City office. Henderson promised us innovative, sustainable design, but they can't deliver the technical expertise they advertised. Marcus and I spent 3 days developing a comprehensive solution that addressed every foundation challenge the Kansas City site presented. Our approach combined his geological expertise with my structural innovation capabilities, creating a building design that was both environmentally advanced and geologically sound. The presentation we delivered exceeded Janet's expectations. Where Henderson had offered generic sustainable features adapted from other projects, we proposed integrated systems specifically designed for Kansas City's climate, geology, and energy requirements. Where Henderson had struggled with foundation complexities, we presented innovative solutions that turned geological challenges into structural advantages. This is exactly what we thought we were getting from Henderson 3 years ago, Janet said after reviewing our comprehensive proposal. Why couldn't they provide this level of technical detail? The answer was obvious to everyone in the room. Because Henderson had never possessed the individual expertise that made such solutions possible. They had been marketing my capabilities without understanding them, promising innovations they couldn't deliver once I was no longer available to provide the underlying technical knowledge. The third member of our emerging team appeared through international connections that Henderson had never known existed. Dr. Lars Andersen, a Danish environmental engineer specializing in northern climate sustainable technology, had been following my patent work through European technical journals for 2 years. Diane, I have been hoping for opportunity to collaborate with an American architect who understands European approaches to green building integration. Most American firms want to purchase European technology without learning underlying principles. But your research demonstrates genuine comprehension of our methods. Lars brought access to Scandinavian innovations that were years ahead of American sustainable technology, advanced geothermal systems that functioned in extreme climates, building integrated wind capture methods that worked in urban environments, and thermal regulation technologies that dramatically reduced energy consumption in high-rise construction. His proposition was straightforward. Establish Peterson Sustainable Design Solutions as the exclusive American representative for Danish Environmental Technologies Group, providing access to cutting-edge innovations that no other American firm could offer. The licensing agreement would generate significant revenue streams while positioning your firm as the premier source for advanced European sustainable technology in North American markets. By November, our River North workspace had expanded to occupy the entire floor. Jennifer had hired 2 recent architecture graduates who showed aptitude for technical complexity over conventional design approaches. Marcus had brought in a junior geological engineer whose PhD dissertation focused on urban foundation innovation. Lars had relocated from Copenhagen to Chicago, establishing a permanent American office for Danish Environmental Technologies Group. The C. Contrast with Henderson and Associates was stark and intentional. Where Henderson operated through hierarchical corporate structures that diluted individual expertise, Peterson Sustainable Design Solutions functioned as a collaborative network of specialists who respected and amplified each other's knowledge. where Henderson marketed generalized sustainability consulting that relied on basic applications of standard technology. We offered genuinely innovative solutions that pushed the boundaries of what sustainable architecture could achieve in challenging environments. Where Henderson had treated advanced technical knowledge as supplemental to corporate brand management, we positioned deep expertise as our primary competitive advantage, the foundation upon which everything else was built. The industry began noticing. Architectural Review published a profile of Peterson's sustainable design solutions in December, describing us as the emerging leader in technically sophisticated sustainable architecture. The article highlighted our international partnerships, our patent portfolio, and our track record of solving complex challenges that defeated traditional firms. While established firms struggle to adapt conventional approaches to evolving environmental requirements, Peterson and her associates are developing genuinely innovative solutions that integrate multiple engineering disciplines with advanced, sustainable technology. The profile mentioned Henderson and Associates only in passing, noting that Peterson's former employer continues to experience project delays and client defections following her departure, raising questions about the institutional knowledge that large firms actually possess versus the individual expertise they market. By December, we were receiving inquiries from cities across North America and Europe, requests for consultation on projects that required the kind of technical sophistication that no traditional architectural firm could provide. The waiting list for our services extended into the following year, with potential clients willing to delay groundbreaking rather than settle for conventional sustainable design approaches. From my desk near the west-facing windows, I could see Henderson and Associates' office tower in the distance. 42 floors of corporate hierarchy that had dismissed 20 years of expertise as lucky timing. The irony was perfect. They remained, trapped in the same mahogany-lined conference rooms where they had erased my contributions, while I was building something entirely new from the foundation up. The distance between us was more than geographical. It was the difference between innovation and imitation, between expertise and pretension, between building something genuine and marketing something borrowed, and every day that distance grew wider. The certified letter arrived on a Monday morning in January, delivered by a courier who required my signature and photo identification. The return address showed Blackstone, Martinez and Associates, one of Chicago's most expensive intellectual property law firms. Inside, 12 pages of legal threats accused me of stealing Henderson and Associates' proprietary technology, violating non-disclosure agreements, and engaging in unfair business practices. I read the document twice, coffee growing cold beside me in the River North office that had become the headquarters of everything Henderson was desperately trying to reclaim. Their legal team was demanding that I cease all independent consulting activities, surrender my patent portfolio, and pay damages for unlawful appropriation of firm intellectual property. The letter's most absurd claim was that my photovoltaic thermal building skin system, protected by patents filed years before I ever worked on any Henderson project, somehow belonged to them because I had conceived the innovation during company time using company resources. I forwarded the letter to Rebecca Chen, the intellectual property attorney I had retained when international licensing opportunities began accelerating. Rebecca specialized in protecting independent inventors against corporate overreach, with a particular expertise in architectural and engineering patents. "Diane, this is actually perfect," Rebecca said during our phone conference an hour later. "They've just provided written evidence that they're attempting to claim ownership of innovations that predate any relevant employment agreements. This letter will be Exhibit A if we need to file countersuit for harassment and defamation." Rebecca had already begun preparing our legal offensive. Henderson's public statements about my role in their projects constituted demonstrable falsehoods that had damaged my professional reputation. Their attempts to claim ownership of my independently developed patents represented clear intellectual property fraud. Most significantly, their systematic erasure of my contributions from company marketing materials, while simultaneously trying to monetize my innovations, created a textbook case of corporate appropriation. More importantly, they've just admitted, in writing, that your innovations are valuable enough to fight over. That validates the licensing fees we're about to demand from them. The second phase of Henderson's desperation manifested through industry pressure campaigns. Margaret Reynolds began calling mutual contacts in Chicago's architectural community, attempting to spread rumors that I had violated professional ethics by competing with my former employer. The strategy backfired spectacularly. Dr. Patricia Fleming from Northwestern University forwarded me an email Margaret had sent to academic colleagues, claiming that I was attempting to profit from Henderson innovations through patent fraud and client manipulation. Patricia's response was copied to the entire Northwestern architectural faculty. Margaret, I have reviewed Diane Peterson's patent filings and academic publications dating back to 2018. Her innovations are thoroughly documented as independent research conducted outside any employment obligations. Your attempts to discredit her appear to be efforts to claim credit for work that Henderson never contributed to. Please remove Northwestern University from any further communications regarding this matter. Similar responses arrived from the University of Chicago, Illinois Institute of Technology, and the Chicago Architecture Foundation. Henderson's reputation within the academic community, built over decades of collaboration and research partnerships, was disintegrating as respected institutions publicly distanced themselves from the firm's increasingly desperate behavior. The third element of Henderson's collapse came through client defections that accelerated beyond anything I had anticipated. Janet Morrison not only terminated Henderson's involvement in the Kansas City project, but filed a breach of contract lawsuit demanding return of fees paid for technical expertise the firm had never actually possessed. Henderson and Associates represented that their senior architect possessed unique capabilities in geological foundation design and sustainable integration technology, Janet's legal filing stated. Subsequent investigation revealed that these capabilities belonged to an individual contractor who is no longer associated with the firm, making Henderson unable to deliver the promised technical services. Sterling Construction filed similar lawsuits in Illinois courts, claiming that Henderson had misrepresented their geothermal expertise and delivered building systems that failed catastrophically due to inadequate technical knowledge. The Meridian Tower Ownership Consortium began questioning whether Henderson deserved credit for innovations they apparently couldn't explain or reproduce. Most significantly, the AIA Gold Medal Selection Committee announced a formal review of the Meridian Tower Award, citing concerns about accurate attribution of innovative design elements to appropriate individual contributors. By February, Henderson and Associates' legal strategy shifted from offensive to purely defensive. Richard Henderson himself appeared at my River North office on a Thursday afternoon, without appointment or announcement, looking 20 years older than the confident executive who had dismissed my contributions 6 months earlier. "Diane, we need to resolve this situation before it destroys both of us," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk like a deflated balloon. I gestured around the bustling office space where Jennifer was coordinating with Japanese seismic engineers, Marcus was reviewing foundation specifications for 3 simultaneous projects, and Lars was conducting a video conference with renewable energy specialists in Copenhagen. "Richard, I'm not sure what you think we need to resolve. Peterson Sustainable Design Solutions is thriving, our international partnerships are expanding, and our clients are completely satisfied with the technical expertise we provide." His hands shook slightly as he opened a leather portfolio that looked expensive but somehow desperate. "The lawsuits are getting out of control. Sterling is demanding $800,000 in damages. Morrison wants complete project redesign costs covered. The AIA review could result in our gold medal being rescinded. Those sound like Henderson problems, not Peterson problems. Diane, you know these legal actions are unfair. We provided you with opportunities, resources, and professional development for 20 years. You can't pretend that your expertise developed in a vacuum, independent of everything Henderson offered you." I leaned back in my chair, looking at the man who had publicly humiliated me in front of 1,000 colleagues, who had reduced 20 years of innovation to lucky timing, who was now begging for mercy from the woman he had tried to erase. Richard, let's discuss what Henderson actually provided me. Office space that I paid for through billable hours that generated millions in revenue. Computer software that I supplemented with personal purchases of specialized programs you wouldn't approve. Professional development opportunities that I funded myself through international conferences and continuing education. I opened my laptop and turned the screen toward him, showing a spreadsheet I had been developing for months. The hunter had become the hunted, and the tables had turned completely. The AIA Chicago Conference Ballroom held 800 architects, engineers, and industry leaders, the largest gathering of design professionals in the Midwest. I sat at the head table on the Fairmont Hotel's mezzanine level, looking out at faces that represented every major firm, university, and construction company in the region. 18 months had passed since Richard Henderson had publicly humiliated me in a similar ballroom just 15 blocks away. Today, he stood at the same podium where prestigious awards were announced, but instead of celebrating Henderson and Associates' achievements, he was acknowledging the expertise that had made those achievements possible. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to address the settlement announced last week between Henderson and Associates and Peterson Sustainable Design Solutions. Richard's voice carried none of the authority I remembered from our partnership meetings. Instead, he sounded like someone reading from a script he wished he could rewrite. After extensive legal review and technical analysis, we have determined that many innovations credited to our firm were actually developed through the independent research and expertise of Diane Peterson. Her contributions to sustainable architecture, particularly in areas of renewable energy integration and seismic-resistant green building design, represent genuinely groundbreaking work that originated from her individual knowledge and patents. The ballroom was completely silent. 800 professionals who had watched my dismissal from Henderson now listened to my former boss publicly acknowledge that 20 years of lucky timing had actually been 20 years of irreplaceable expertise. Effective immediately, Henderson and Associates will be paying ongoing licensing fees to Peterson Sustainable Design Solutions for any projects that incorporate Dr. Peterson's patented technologies. Furthermore, we want to recommend that clients seeking advanced sustainable architecture consider working directly with Peterson Sustainable Design Solutions, which possesses technical capabilities that we frankly cannot replicate. The applause began slowly, then built to sustained ovation, as the full meaning of Richard's statement became clear. The most prestigious architectural firm in Chicago was publicly admitting that a single individual possessed expertise they had never understood, capabilities they couldn't match, innovations they had claimed but never created. I stood to acknowledge the recognition, looking out at colleagues who had witnessed both my erasure and my vindication. Jennifer Park, now my project director, beamed from the audience beside Marcus Johnson and Dr. Lars Anderson, the team that had helped transform my patents into a thriving international practice. But the real vindication wasn't Richard's forced apology or the industry's belated recognition. It was the empire I had built from the ashes of their betrayal. Peterson Sustainable Design Solutions now occupied 3 floors of a renovated warehouse in River North, with satellite offices in Copenhagen, Munich, and Tokyo. Our team of 47 specialists represented expertise that no traditional architectural firm could assemble. Earthquake engineers from California, renewable energy researchers from Denmark, geothermal specialists from Iceland, and green building pioneers from 6 different countries. The contrast with Henderson and Associates was stark and intentional. While they struggled to retain clients and repair their reputation, we were turning down projects because our waiting list extended 2 years into the future. While they fought to convince contractors that they possessed technical capabilities, international engineering firms were competing to partner with us exclusively. The financial transformation was equally dramatic. My personal income from patent Licensing alone now exceeded what I had earned during my final 3 years at Henderson combined. The Frankfurt photovoltaic project generated monthly royalties of $47,000. The Tokyo modular green infrastructure installation produced licensing fees that averaged $32,000 per month. The Sydney adaptive wind capture system had earned $600,000 in its first year of operation. But beyond the patents, Peterson Sustainable Design Solutions had become the global leader in technically sophisticated sustainable architecture. Cities across North America and Europe now required our consultation for any major green building project. Universities sent graduate students to our offices for internships that couldn't be replicated anywhere else. The United Nations had retained us to develop sustainable building standards for climate-resilient urban development. The morning after the AIA conference, I walked through our main workspace watching Jennifer coordinate installation schedules for 5 simultaneous international projects. At 28, she was earning more money and gaining more specialized knowledge than most architects achieved in entire careers. Her desk was covered with technical manuals in 4 languages, patent applications for innovations she was developing independently, and correspondence with research institutions that recognized her as an emerging leader in sustainable design. Diane, the Ministry of Urban Development in Barcelona wants to discuss licensing our integrated solar thermal system for their new housing district. The project timeline is ambitious, but they're offering $800,000 for comprehensive consultation and technology licensing. $800,000, more than Henderson had paid me in 4 years of salary, offered by a single client for 6 months of specialized consulting. Marcus occupied the corner office that overlooked the Chicago River, managing geological, consulting contracts that stretched from Vancouver to Miami. His reputation for solving impossible foundation challenges had made him the most sought-after structural consultant in North America, with engineering firms competing to subcontract. His expertise. The Seattle Seismic-Resistant Tower Project just received final approval from the City Planning Commission, he reported during our weekly coordination meeting. They specifically cited our innovative foundation design as setting new standards for earthquake-safe, sustainable construction. 3 other cities want to discuss similar projects. Dr. Lars Andersen had transformed our Danish Environmental Technologies Partnership into the exclusive North American gateway for European green building innovation. His Copenhagen connections now generated over $2 million annually in technology licensing and consultation fees, with manufacturers across Scandinavia depending on our firm to navigate American regulatory requirements. The wind capture installations in Toronto and Montreal have exceeded energy generation projections by 37%, Lars announced, his Danish accent carrying satisfaction that transcended language barriers. The Canadian government wants to discuss nationwide implementation of our adaptive system technology. The recognition extended beyond financial success. The American Institute of Architects awarded me their gold medal for individual innovation, specifically citing my pioneering work in integrating advanced renewable technologies with earthquake-resistant sustainable design. The presentation ceremony acknowledged that my innovations had fundamentally changed how the architectural profession approaches environmental challenges in urban construction. Harvard University's Graduate School of Design invited me to establish the Peterson Chair in Sustainable Innovation, a professorship that would allow me to teach advanced courses while continuing my research and consultation work. MIT offered a similar position, specifically focused on patent development and technology commercialization for architectural applications. The invitations represented something I had never expected: academic recognition that my expertise constituted genuine scholarship worthy of university-level instruction, not just practical application of existing knowledge. International recognition followed quickly. The Royal Institute of British Architects awarded me their International Prize for Innovation, acknowledging that my patent portfolio had advanced the global state of sustainable architecture beyond what any single practitioner had previously achieved. The German Green Building Council presented me with their Lifetime Achievement Award, despite the fact that I was only 46 years old. Dr. Peterson's contributions to renewable energy integration represent innovations that will influence sustainable construction practices for decades to come. The award citation stated, "Her work demonstrates that individual expertise and dedication can achieve breakthroughs that large institutional efforts often cannot produce." But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from sources I hadn't expected. Young architects from across the country began reaching out through LinkedIn and professional networks, seeking mentorship and guidance for developing their own specialized expertise. Dr. Maria Santos from the University of Texas wrote, "Your career path demonstrates that technical mastery and independent research can create opportunities that traditional firm employment never provides. I'm developing expertise in desert climate, sustainable design, inspired by your example of building specialized knowledge that transcends any single employer." Kevin Liu from the California College of Architecture sent a similar message. "Watching your journey from Henderson dismissal to international recognition has convinced me that developing unique capabilities is more valuable than climbing corporate ladders. I'm focusing my graduate research on wildfire-resistant sustainable construction, hoping to create the kind of specialized expertise that belongs to me rather than to any firm." These messages reminded me that my vindication extended beyond personal success. Young professionals were learning that expertise built through individual dedication and strategic preparation could provide security and recognition that no corporate employment structure could guarantee. The monthly royalty checks from Henderson and Associates arrived with predictable regularity, each payment representing technologies they had dismissed as supplemental contributions, now generating more income than my former salary. The checks were signed by Thomas Bradley, the partner who had claimed my innovations were lucky timing. The irony was perfect. He was now personally authorizing payments that acknowledged 20 years of expertise he had never bothered to understand. But the ultimate vindication wasn't financial or professional. It was personal transformation that had emerged from what initially seemed like career destruction. The morning I was publicly humiliated at Henderson, I had defined myself through external validation, firm recognition, partner approval, corporate advancement. My identity was tied to their perception of my value, my self-worth dependent on their acknowledgement of my contributions. The journey from that moment to this had taught me that expertise belongs to the person who develops it, that knowledge gained through individual effort cannot be erased by corporate politics, and that 20 years of dedicated learning creates capabilities that no dismissal can diminish. I had discovered that being fired from Henderson wasn't the end of my career. It was the beginning of my actual professional life, freed from constraints that had limited my potential and prevented me from building something entirely my own. From my office window, I could see the Henderson and Associates building in the distance, 42 floors of corporate hierarchy that had contained my ambitions. For 2 decades, the distance between us was more than geographical. It was the difference between working for someone else's vision and building my own, between seeking permission and taking ownership, between hoping for recognition and creating undeniable value. Every morning, I walked through our River North headquarters, surrounded by evidence that contradicted everything Henderson had claimed about my contributions. Patents that proved my innovations were individually conceived and independently developed. International contracts that demonstrated global recognition of my expertise. A team of specialists who had chosen to work for Peterson Sustainable Design solutions because of the technical opportunities it provided, rather than the salary security it offered. The young architects who sought my mentorship reminded me of myself 25 years earlier, hungry for knowledge and determined to build something significant. But I encouraged them to learn from my mistakes. Don't spend 20 years building someone else's legacy. Don't wait for permission to develop specialized expertise. And don't depend on corporate structures to recognize or protect the value you create. Develop capabilities that belong to you, I told them during the mentorship sessions I now conducted monthly. Build knowledge that no employer can erase. Create innovations that establish your individual reputation, and remember that expertise gained through genuine dedication will eventually find its proper recognition, regardless of any temporary setbacks. The transformation was complete, but ongoing. Peterson's sustainable design solutions continued expanding internationally, with new partnerships emerging monthly and patent applications that promised to generate revenue for decades. The expertise that Henderson had dismissed as lucky timing was now recognized globally as pioneering innovation that had advanced an entire profession. They had called my success lucky, as if 20 years of midnight study sessions, international research trips, and relentless pursuit of technical mastery were accidental advantages rather than deliberate preparation. They had treated my innovations as corporate property, while never understanding the individual effort that made them possible. They had erased my contributions from their marketing while benefiting from expertise they couldn't replicate. But luck had nothing to do with my vindication. 20 years of work wasn't luck. 20 years of learning wasn't coincidence. 20 years of building expertise that transcended any single employment situation wasn't fortunate timing. It was strategic preparation for exactly this moment, when everything they had tried to take from me would become the foundation of something they could never match or claim. And every month, when their licensing payment arrived at my office, I was reminded of the most satisfying irony of all. They now paid me to exist, exactly the opposite of what they had tried to achieve by firing me. The silence wasn't surrender. The silence was preparation, and I had been preparing for a very long time. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.